Hi, everyone. Hello. Salut. Bonjour. Bon après-midi. Welcome to the second and final day of the fourth annual National Summit on Episodic Disabilities and Employment. As mentioned 1 minute ago, my name is Tammy Yates-Rajaduray. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Executive Director of Realize, home and host of the Secretariat of the National Episodic Disabilities Forum. On behalf of the organizing committee comprising Janet London, Roger Musselman, George De Silva, Artie Hurry, Laura Herrera, Alexandra Pennell, Rosie Smith, and led by our brave Melissa Egan, it is my honor to welcome you to the fourth virtual National Summit on Episodic Disabilities and Employment. As I did yesterday, I'd like to thank ESDC, Employment and Social Development Canada, and the Government of Canada for their continued support that makes this important virtual gathering possible. As a recap of day one, we began the summit in a good way with an Indigenous opening by a dear friend of Realize, Elder Don Tuna. Elder Don's opening grounded us by recognizing the lands on which we all find ourselves in Turtle Island, but most importantly, by recognizing the first peoples of this land, now called Canada. We then had a recorded message from Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and People with Disabilities, Minister Kamal Kera. Minister Kera acknowledged the pioneering work that Realize has been doing for the last 25 years and shared the Government of Canada's commitment to the social inclusion and participation of people with disabilities in Canadian society. Minister Kera also shared that the social investment of that commitment has been through, for example, the Opportunities Fund for People with Disabilities. We kickstarted the summit presentations with a keynote from award-winning teacher, solo performer, director, and thought leader, Tracy Erin Smith. Tracy took us through a mini masterclass on the power of personal storytelling. She walked us through the painful genesis of her own storytelling journey and shared indispensable tips on how we could each craft our own personal stories. We are all unique and have personal stories to share, Tracy said. And that's exactly what Tracy has been supporting us with here at Realize, with the amazing work that she has been doing in building the capacity of Realize's Episodic Disabilities Speaker Bureau members. We then had a presentation by Susan Wallace, Section Chief, Disability and Accessibility Statistics Lead at Stats Canada. Susan shared an overview of the most recent findings of the 2022 Canadian Survey on Disabilities. That overview also included some first-of-its-kind data on episodic disabilities, which StatScan shared yesterday publicly for the first time. Susan's presentation was so rich that we had over 40 questions and comments after her presentation. And of course, we couldn't get to them all. but the response to her presentation certainly demonstrated the high level of engagement by all of you to the presentation. Dr. Monique Gignac followed Susan's presentation. Dr. Gignac is Scientific Director and a Senior Scientist at the Institute for Work and Health and a Professor at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. Dr. Gignac's presentation focused on the findings of an evaluation of the Job Demands and Accommodation Planning Toolkit, which we fondly call JDAPT. Some of the perceptions of the JDAPT that Dr. Gignac shared were that it was extremely easy to understand, and 84% of the respondents agreed to that. It was extremely easy to complete, and that was agreed upon by another 84%. In terms of which percentage of the respondents use the JDAPT outside of work, 73% did around the first or the second time period that the evaluation was done. And by the third time period of the evaluation, 70% of respondents used the JDAPT outside of work. Dr. Gignac also shared that there were minor or few differences in JDAPT outcomes according to gender, age, condition type, work modality, union membership, or organizational size. So in other words, as Dr. Gignac shared, the JDAPT worked well for most groups. Jacob Love and Misbah Anis from Crawford, Shondon and Partners, LLC, presented on episodic disabilities and the duty to accommodate. These legal experts walked us through what the duty is to accommodate. What are employers' duties? What are employees' duties? And what are the limits to accommodation? We recall the discussion about undue hardship and what the measurements for undue hardship may be. They rounded off their session with case law demonstrations of several employers' failures to accommodate employees with episodic disabilities. Our final session for yesterday, day one, was led by Annalisa Badalou. The session, titled Are Fairness Concerns Preventing Equity Action? Moving Towards a Culture of Accessibility. It really prompted us to dig deep and pull back the layers of unconscious bias in the workplace. And these often prevent employers from offering accommodation and employees from seeking them. Annalisa challenged us to reflect on several questions. Question number one, how do we foster organizational fairness and provide individual accommodations? Number two, as employers, what is our duty of care? And this is outside of the legal duties that were covered by our legal experts. Question number three, how do we fulfill our duty of care? Annalisa also shared several knowledge tips. Number one, have ableist culture conversations. We know that sometimes these conversations are uncomfortable. Knowledge tip number two, always be unlearning and reframing. The final knowledge tip was always identify, acknowledge, and reflect on privilege. And because our theme for this summit is moving from knowledge to action, Annalisa left us with 3 action tips. 1, establish and learn from communities of practice. 2, create a culture of accessibility from the ground up. And 3, always be revising policies as needed. I know for some, the final session was a little uncomfortable, but discomfort is part of unlearning and relearning. And that, in a nutshell, was our day 1. I am thrilled to pass things over to Jennifer Fernandez, the training officer here at Realize, who will guide us through today, day 2. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for day 2 of the summit. We kindly ask that all questions are put in the Q&A box you can find at the bottom of the Zoom window. We are not using the chat for accessibility reasons. I would also like to remind our speakers to speak slowly. We have ASL and LSQ interpreters with us, and they need us to slow down. Realize we'll be posting the slides we have been given permission to share on our website. Participants will receive a link. All recordings from the summit will be available on our website in June.